Howdy, y'alls. Welcome back to Ant 315. It's me, Dr. Edwards, this time to help you out with Module 4 Anthropology and Food, Feast and Famine. Bad pun. This is a meaty module, but chink. So yeah, there is a ton of stuff this week. And I want to suggest getting started early and not waiting to the last minute with reading and resources and assignments. But to help you get kind of focused in on what we're interested in this week, we it's all about food and how we produce food and the implications that the way that we produce food have on the environment and society at large. Um, if you've taken an intro anthro course, which probably most of you have, given that this is a 300 level course, I wanted to give a quick little recap of subsistence systems, and these are the main ways that folks go about feeding themselves. All right, you can think of them as modes of production, subsistence systems, food systems. And there tend to be five fundamental patterns that we see cross culturally and through time. Now, one thing I want to make really clear from the get go is lots of folks tend to think that it's some evolutionary model, that you start as a forager and evolve to an industrialized food production system. Well, we may actually see that pattern in some instances, but it is not a universal by any means, right? And we don't want to make that sort of overgeneralization. Okay, in fact, there are plenty of examples where groups have gone backwards, if you would, if you want to use the evolutionary perspective. Check out Jared Diamond, Guns, Germs, and Steel. He's got some great examples in there, particularly in Polynesia. Anyway, I don't mean to get off topic. Let me recap our five basic subsistence systems that we see. First up, we got foraging, and this is the original lifestyle, right? For 99% of human history, and even before we were fully modern humans, foraging was the way that we sustained ourselves. And some folks call it hunting and gathering, gathering and hunting. I like the term foraging because it doesn't place a value on hunting or gathering as being better than, depending if you say it first or second. Anyway, foraging is really extracting the things you need to survive directly from your environment. All right, you're not planting crops. You're not growing gardens. You go out and gather your resources directly from the environment. So a great example of a foraging society are the Kong, also known as the San peoples of southern Africa, and a more specific name for a group is the Dobe-Ju Huansi. And I include a resource in my announcement about them. Check them out, right? It highlights some really key patterns that we see with foragers. Primarily that they're egalitarian. You can't have any one person in charge. Everybody is seen as contributing to the welfare of the group, even though there is a gendered division of labor. Men's contributions are not viewed as being better than or more than women's contributions. They're viewed as complementary, right, and egalitarian. Yeah. Um, Next up, we have pastoralism. And pastoralism is where you rely on livestock. Okay, there tends to be a couple of different types of pastoralism. You have folks that may have a kind of a home base and move around from that, or you may have a different version where you're constantly kind of in motion. Always, you never kind of have a permanent camp. But the key thing is that you're relying on the livestock, and you tend not actually to eat the critters, right? Rather, you use the byproducts from them. A great example of this is seen in the Nuer of Sudan. They're cattle folk. They how to put it, everything is defined through cattle in the life of the Nuer. Marriage. Marriages are cemented with the gifting of cattle. Family lineages can be traced through cattle. They like to say that cattle is the idiom of life in among the Nuer. But check them out, and you can get some more details on pastoralists. They're a good example. Next up, horticulture. Think of horticulture as small scale gardens. All right, you're not cultivating vast fields or anything like that, but it'll be kind of acre sized plots. Often with kind of intercropping where you'll have um, like corns, beans, and squash here in North America, often grown together. Right, and the three plant types actually support each other, which is really kind of cool from a cultural ecological perspective. Now, kind of a step up from horticulture is agriculture, and kind of the key difference between the two is that agriculture is going to use inputs or irrigation or beasts of burden, things like that. Whereas in horticulture, it's all done by hand, right? You don't use an ox to pull your plow, right? You use a digging stick, right? But in agriculture, you would see an ox pulling a plow to till a field or to plow a field. I hope that kind of differentiates the two for you. And lastly, we have industrialization or industrialism. Now, this is the one that we're probably most familiar with because it's the food system that we see in our own society here in the U.S. And industrialization is all about the mechanized production of food, right? Rather than using an ox to pull your plow, you have a tractor or a combine, and it's usually on a massive scale. And this is another kind of key thing to keep in mind with these general patterns is population size, right? Egalitarians tend to be fairly small groups. Pastoralists, they're a little bit bigger. Horticulturalists can kind of on par with pastoralists, but there's a big difference when you get to agriculture because it allows for real sedentary populations. Okay, you no longer have to move around to resources. You're growing your food in place to support a population. And with industrialization, it's like putting it on steroids. Okay, hitting the afterburner. You are using resources at a non-renewable rate, usually exceeding the carrying capacity of the land. Usually, I mean, in our own industrialized system, it's predicated on fossil fuels. Without that, none of it would actually exist, right? So yeah, these are the sorts of connections we want to be thinking about this week. Now, our text has got an awesome overview, really looking at how production changed through time. Um, I'd highlight that Malthus is, a really important figure when it comes to understanding these things. Catastrophism, catastrophe, when major catastrophes happen, where famines that are a product of exhausting the fertility of the soil in a place, things like this, where you have population is fixed in one place, but it's growing, and it is going to consume resources at a very alarming rate, right? Because population keeps increasing, but resources are limited, and it's a setup for catastrophe. There's actually a great book if you want to dig into some of these things. I'm including it, but this actually shows it to you. It's called Overshoot by Caton. This is absolutely good stuff. It's a great resource for this class, particularly this week. Um, Kind of moving on, I wanted to touch on kind of food and culture. Oh, hold on here. I got a eyelash in my eye. There, now I can see. Um, this this is really cool stuff. Looking at, not necessarily just how food is produced, okay, but food in general. Because without it, it's such a fundamental thing. It strongly influences different aspects of our society. It has really strong influences on social norms and values, cultural identity. And you can even, look at it from a kind of a symbolic perspective and see kind of how they reflect human environmental relationships. How you produce your food says something about how you see your relationship with the environment that you are producing your food from, right? So yeah, I wanted to give some examples to kind of offer some insights into food and culture and cultural identity and norms and values and relationships with the environment. So I wrote up a list here. Now, we can often think of food as, well, let me give you an example. Within Muslim cultures, pork is forbidden. Okay, um, it's really common to see religious taboos with regard to certain foods. Okay, where I used to work in West Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, it's predominantly Islamic. Where I used to work in West Africa. And yeah, in urban centers where you tend to see a very strong presence of Islam, there's absolutely no pork to be seen, right? As you'd expect, because it's reflecting that religious value. Okay, but you go off into a rural village, and even though some folks may describe them as being Islamic or Muslim, their values are a bit different, and you can see this in the food that they eat, right? It's not uncommon for rural communities to harvest wild pork, warthog in particular. Tasty stuff, by the way. Yeah, it makes my mouth water just remembering it. Anyway, so you kind of see this fundamental difference between kind of urban values associated with religion, and then a different set that are associated more with just making sure you get enough to eat in the rural environment. Okay. What's another good one? Traditional gardening, horticulture in Papua New Guinea. This is a great example because it really kind of offers some insight into how people use their environment as a model to produce food. In these horticultural gardens, you'll see that they're kind of a mirror image of the environment around them, which tends to be a subtropical rainforest. Okay, and so you have tiering, you have canopies, if you would, and you see the same thing reflected in the gardens. Okay, and you ask folks, well, why do you organize your garden like this? And they'll usually you'll find connections to, well, this is how our environment shows us how to grow things. That that this needs more light than this, so we put this under this other plant, which gives it shade, and yeah, just elaborate relationships. Yeah, there's another great one in Papua New Guinea, and this is also about pigs. There are huge exchanges called mocha, where a person throws a big party and gives away food. It's usually a key component, but it's not just food. Food's just one part, so it's not strictly food. But pigs, giving away pigs, and they're being given away to eat them, is a key aspect of actually acquiring social status. Okay, you actually get your friends to give you their pigs, and then you give them away to everyone. You redistribute them. So I mean, yeah, absolutely incredible relationships that are outlined in that sort of example. What's another one? You can think about food and when you eat it. Here in the U.S., we tend to have 3 meals a day, or maybe 4 if you include a snack in the afternoon or something like that. But that's if you think about that, when we eat, there's also a connection to our work schedule, right? Well, for most folks, because there's always off. Working, the swing shift or something like that. But we tend to recognize these basic divisions in our day, and we have specific meals to go with them. Right? That's not universal for everybody. They divide it up differently. Where I used to work in Mali, some folks just had 2 meals a day. And it wasn't necessarily an economic thing, financial. That's just the way you did it. There weren't necessarily the resources to have more. You can also see like how people eat. Do they eat independently? Do they eat in family groups? Do they eat in larger groups which include extended family or other community members? All this is reflecting key values and norms that are connected to food, right? It is such a fundamental thing. It's actually so basic that we often don't even think about it in this way. So I want to kind of encourage you to think about food and culture in a different light, right? Another good one. Personal story, a little anecdote, where when this is often referred to as my goat head sauce story. And if you've taken one of my classes before, you've probably heard this one, but it's a good one. There's a dish called goat head sauce in Mali, West Africa, and actually, kind of all West Africa has a version of it. In one of the local languages, it's called Bakungulona. And this is, talk about testing my ethnocentrism and my ability to apply cultural relativity. This dish starts with you got the head of a goat, and whole head, fur, horns, the works. Okay, you throw it in a pot of water with some chopped up onions. You boil it for a day. Then you let it sit for a day or two. Then you reheat it, and then you eat it. And this is considered a very special dish, and that actually is a reflection that protein is fairly scarce. Most folks in Mali that have livestock are using the byproducts of the livestock, milk, things like that. They don't tend to actually kill the animals, because then you lose other resources. But when you do harvest a goat, you want to make sure you get everything you possibly can out of it, okay? And that includes eating the brain and all the little bits in the skull, okay? Even, the large long bones are cracked open and the marrow's eaten. You don't waste the protein, and it's really a reflection of how protein scarce the nation is in general. So goat head sauce is an extreme example of that. It really highlights how important protein is, and it also underscores that the reactions that we have to sorts of things are completely cultural. Right? For me, as a Westerner eating goat head sauce, it was really difficult because I had not been exposed to that sort of thing before. I mean, I'd read about it, but it's a different thing from reading to actually doing it. Incidentally, it was a test from one of my one of my key consultants, kind of a person of significant importance in my research. Without him, none of my work would have really happened. And he made this dish to see how far I'd be willing to go. Was I going to be a squeamish American and have issues, or was I going to go local and do my best to appreciate kind of like the local reality? Incidentally, I passed the test, but not without being recognized as having some issues, and we all sat and joked about those, which was a good time. Yeah, another good one is good example is where I in West Africa in general and in other parts of the world, rice is a primary staple. All right, even when it's not grown locally, it'll be imported, and there tends to be socioeconomic associations with it. Like where I worked in Mali and Senegal, Mauritania, if you ate locally produced rice, it was a sign of how poor you were. All right, because everyone considers imported rice, particularly from China, to be the best, and if you can afford it, you buy that. Right, so rice becomes a socioeconomic status symbol. Really cool stuff. I don't mean to geek out and go on, but those are some good examples that should help you explore some of our concepts this week. I'm going to make another video for our assignment, so make sure to check that out. And I'll see you on the discussion boards, y'alls. Take care.